the why is so important. So the challenge involved a lot of work like that. It provided me with what I needed in terms of connection.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to speak with and be embraced, albeit via Zoom, people who got my story. And sometimes we can have the most amazing people in our lives, but if they don't understand what we're going through, they don't understand what we're going through. And I think that's the key here.
Welcome to Amy Liz Harrison's podcast, Eternally Amy, a mum of 8's journey from jail to joy, a Gen Xer who overcame her struggle with alcohol to become a best-selling author and mental health advocate. She shares stories of hope and offers ideas for others struggling with mental health challenges. One thing is for sure, you'll leave with something to chew on. And now, here's your host, Amy Liz Harrison.
Well, greetings, compadres. One of my favorite sayings in recovery is that connection is the opposite of addiction. And that is basically something that is said by various people that I have heard anyway in 12-step rooms. And the whole idea behind it is that, you know, when I'm in my addiction by myself, it's a very dark and isolating place where my negative thoughts grow, and they grow freely. And so for me personally, it is better to recover with other people who at least understand what it's like to be in addiction and recovery. And those people are then able to kind of shine a flashlight on maybe false narratives that I'm listening to, or, you know, things in my head that are kind of going a little bit askew. And boom, it's like we form a connection. And that can happen with people I've known for many years. It can happen with people who I just met. And that is what I love so much. One of the many things I love about being sober in recovery. And so I love that my guest today, you know, I was reading about her and she mentioned that one of the things that she loves is connection. And I was like, well, there you go. Perfect. And so I want to, with very vast amounts of pleasure, introduce you to Michelle McDonald. And here's the deal. She is a sobriety coach. She's a life coach, and her journey is an open book. She's passionate about sharing her story, and she is a connector. And so I am so grateful to have you on today, Michelle. Thank you for coming on to the show.
Thank you for having me, Amy. It's my pleasure to be able to connect with you and have a bit of a chat about this wild ride that is sobriety.
I love it. So as you can tell, Michelle is Australian, yay, which I love so much. Obviously, my husband is Australian, you all know, so love it. And what I was wondering if you wouldn't mind doing for us, Michelle, is just, I wanted to kind of give you the floor and just give you a chance to tell your story. However much or little you would like to share is great. Would love to just hear you launch in.
Sure, no problem. So I'm a 48-year-old Australian woman who has grown up in a culture that drinking is revered in. It's a rite of passage. It's part of everything we do. It's happiness, it's sadness, it's laughter, it's connection, it's disconnection, it's everything. So as someone that has grown up in a society that is how we operate, drinking very organically and very naturally fell into my lap, so to speak. As a teenager, like most Australian, and, you know, I shouldn't just isolate it to countries because I think it's all over the world. 14 and 15, we sort of started with the weekend binge drinking. You know, you'd have a few drinks on the weekend and then survive your way through the week and move on. And I think that's where I first got the taste of how I felt alcohol connected me to others and connected me to self. As I've moved along in my journey, I've realized that that's a false connection, really. But at the time, it gives you what you think you need to survive, to get through, to be confident, to be a teenager, to be moving through your early 20s and those sorts of things. I think as I evolved through the years, it was something that was just there. It was a coping mechanism. And I think for the most part, Amy, it really didn't present as what I saw as a problem until sort of into my early 40s, where it became very much evident that for me to function and to present myself as what I wanted to present myself, I needed it to be my crutch. I needed it to reinforce the values of my enoughness. I needed it to fill me with some confidence. I needed it to be part of anything and everything that I chose to do. Now, whether that was from a quiet Sunday afternoon with the mindset, oh, this is going to be one drink by the pool. And I mean, let's be honest, it was never ever one drink, to organizing, catch up with girlfriends. I've always been a big believer in how important connection is, but back as a drinker, the connectivity always involved some form of alcohol. And I think that made me feel a little glamorous, or made me feel a little doing what was meant to be done. All those sips of rosé by the pool or having lunch with the girls actually sort of just chipped away at who I was, until I'd reached a point where I'd lost so much of who I am, and that had been replaced with what I needed to drink to try and get back to that place of Michelle, which I never really regained until I decided to stop drinking. I was always someone that really liked to have a drink. And someone asked me a while back, did I actually have a rock bottom? And I don't think I did. I think I had a series of day after days of just dragging my sorry ass through this existence, which was so sad and lonely and isolating that it just became normal. And that normal then was my rock bottom. Lots of contributing factors as I move along the timeline. COVID hit, and that isolated everybody further. And I'm not the only person in the world to talk about COVID. But I do think at the core of my dependencies and reliance on alcohol, that was all there well before COVID or any set of circumstances that might have come in to influence how I was going to navigate my way through life. So that's a sort of a nutshell, I guess, of where I was and where I've come through. My sobriety date is the 1st of October 2021. So I'm just nudging nearly 2 years. And
congratulations.
Thank you. It's a massive achievement. And anyone out there that is in a space where they've changed their life around, those numbers are really important. They're really important to acknowledge achievements, to recognize growth, to help us heal, to be able to look back. I don't look back so much with regret. I often look back with reflection, and I think there's more growth and more opportunity for understanding if we reflect as opposed to regret.
Mm-hmm. Yep. One thing that you just said that struck me was you lost who you were. And it was like, that just hit me. I totally feel the same. I felt like I sold my soul to booze to the point where I could no longer tell, if am I a nice person? Am I a mean person? Am I who even am I anymore? Because I was so flooded with sort of just this hazy non-existence, and I was just kind of a vapor of a person. So that hit me. I liked the way you said that so much. And I loved that you touched on the phrase enoughness. Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, I mean, gosh, so many times just wondering, am I enough just on my own without this liquid courage? And will people accept me? Will people like me? All of that. Mm-hmm. So did you go ahead?
No, I was just going to say that was one of my big, I guess, if I had fears going into sobriety, was who was I going to be without it? Mm-hmm. And how was that going to look? And so much of that was caught up in what I thought alcohol was giving me and what I thought it was providing me, and the confidence that I thought as I was sipping that it was, inflating me. And in all honesty, Amy, it was just everything I thought it gave me, it just stripped away like tenfold. I thought I was this sparkly, vibrant, amazing person. And, you know, it's only really when you look back on photos and things like that, and you can sort of see this, like a shutdown in your eyes, like you're not quite there anymore. You're going through the motions. You're doing the job. You might be caring for your kids. You might be a partner, a daughter, a sister, or whatever. But you really are just going through the motions until you can get to that next point of either having a drink or having one of those days where it's, you know, this is going to be my day one. And I had so many day ones. You know, I'd wake up in the morning and I'd be like, this is it. Today is the day. You can do this. And I couldn't do it. I wanted to do it, but I couldn't do it. And I wasn't ready to do it. I think at the core of it, I was so frightened about who I was going to lose by removing the alcohol from my life, that it kept me bogged down in this really lonely, really lonely existence of eat, sleep, drink, repeat.
And okay, so here's what I think of when I hear you say that, because the loneliness was huge for me too. And I distinctly remember, like, the first time I went to rehab, it was, I mean, I went because my husband made me go, right? And it was for somebody else. It was for him. It was for my kids, whatever. And then the second time, so after I got out of treatment, I relapsed immediately at the airport. And right after that, you know, I just spiraled right out of control again. Within 2 weeks, I had a DUI. I was in a ton of legal trouble. And I went back to the same rehab facility. And it was like that time, I didn't really know that I deserved to get sober. Like, that was kind of not even, it wouldn't even register in my mind. But I feared that I wouldn't be able to do it. But I thought, you know, there might be a chance that I can do it. And there might be a chance that I would be worth it. And that maybe this is supposed to happen. Maybe I can actually do it. And that whole, like, tiny spark was all I needed to just kind of get going and let them teach me, like, how to start just getting comfortable with feeling uncomfortable, because that was my whole thing. I didn't want to be anesthetized, right? Because I couldn't fathom what life would be like sober. I hated myself when I was sober. And it was, of course, after drinking all night, you know, kind of thing. And so I didn't want that feeling all the time. I didn't want any feelings all the time. And so that was something new to me, was to get in touch with my feelings. Did you find that was a whole thing? Did you find that you actually didn't even regain who you were, but maybe even a different and better person? Or how would you describe it?
Yeah, I think I didn't get myself back. It's not a reinvention. It's like a rediscovery of who I am. And I think that's much nicer, because I was always there. I just drowned her out, or, you know, got so used to not feeling the feels. And that's one of the things in sobriety, is you got to feel these things, and sometimes they don't feel great. And that's, you know, our first go-to as newly sober people is, okay, I need to drown this out because I don't want to feel this. This just is too uncomfortable. This is feeling icky. I don't want to feel it. And we jump straight back to where we were. But actually sitting in the discomfort and sitting in that moment. And the thing I find, and when I, you know, as you mentioned earlier, I coach some amazing people these days, that feeling of discomfort doesn't last as long as we think it's going to last. We just have to sit with it for that moment. And then we can sort of work through what that means and where it's hit and what we need to deal with. But certainly in the early days and leading up to making the decision to stop drinking, the fear of feeling, even as someone who would describe herself as a very emotional, and in a good way emotional, you know, I love to give people hugs, and I'm all about the good feels. but not so much about the bad feels at the time. It was, I don't want to deal with this. I don't know how to deal with this. I just push it away. And I think in those when I entered sobriety, I decided to do a 90-day challenge with an Australian group called How I Quit Alcohol. And I wasn't sure how that was going to look like when I went in. I knew I would do the 90 days because when I put my mind to something, I can be quite determined and quite dedicated and quite competitive. So I knew that I would do the 90 days, but I wasn't sure what that would mean at the end of the 90 days. I didn't know if I was going to come out, quote unquote, a normal drinker, whatever that is, or if I was going to be able to moderate, if it was going to be an awareness piece, if it was going to be just a challenge. And I think at about the 5 or 6 week point of that challenge, I really started to enjoy who I was and rediscovering me and redefining what my life was going to look like. So I think, as you talked about, that spark when you sort of thought, well, this might be a hope, this might be what happened. It probably wasn't there when I entered into the challenge, but it certainly started to emerge, and it became much stronger and much more evident in a path that I wanted to walk down than going backwards any further. I just wanted to keep working on me and keep, I guess, discovering all those things that I had covered up with alcohol. You start to peel off layers of yourself in good ways and also in some tough ways as well. But it all contributed to really good things to where I am now.
Mm-hmm. One of the beautiful things about getting sober and recovering these days is it's not a one size fits all kind of a thing. And I love that because people get sober in all kinds of ways. I mean, from going cold turkey to kind of moderating down to going to treatment to, all different kinds of programs that they now have. And so when you mentioned this 90 days, How I Quit Alcohol challenge, was that like an online thing? Did you go to treatment anywhere?
It was an online program that was with live people. So we had a catch up once a week on a Sunday afternoon, which for me has formed part of my daily practices now. It sort of sets me up for the week moving forward. We had doing the work. Everyone sort of talks about the work in sobriety as we moved through that challenge. And some of that was, journaling. Some of it was digging deep. Some of it was talking about, I'm a big believer in understanding why did I drink and why do I want to stop drinking? Because I think, as you alluded to earlier, if we don't understand our why, or we're doing it for someone else, I think it's destined to maybe not be as successful as if you actually understand why it is that you want to do it. When I coach people, we spend a lot of time nutting out, where are you coming from? Why did you drink? Now, moving forward, why do you want to stop? And sometimes that why can start out very simply. I need to. I want to be better. And I think as we move through sobriety, our why changes, or it evolves, or it gets bigger, it gets vaster, it gets more complex, it gets more, it gets more honed into our needs and our desires as we move forward. But the why is so important. So the challenge involved a lot of work like that. It provided me with what I needed in terms of connection. I was able to speak with and be embraced, albeit via Zoom, people who got my story. And sometimes we can have the most amazing people in our lives, but if they don't understand what we're going through, they don't understand what we're going through. And I think that's the key here. There's so much isolation in addiction and in alcoholism and in all those sorts of things. If you can look at someone in the eye and tell them your story, and they can look at you and you know that they get it, that's huge. It's so big. It's so big. It's so important. And that's not to say that your family and friends who don't have the afflictions that you have don't love you and can't support you, but there really is something so deep and so profound of knowing that person across the computer knows what I'm going through. They get it. They understand what it's like to wake up and absolutely loathe what I've done to myself the day before, but have no idea how to pull myself out of the weeds. So
Right.
connection was huge. And I think that has been the corner of how I've moved forward in my sobriety, and certainly how I help people move forward in their sobriety. I think that connection also then moved into a little bit of accountability, because you started to gel with these people and you started to really understand them. And you really, the last thing I ever wanted to do was rock up to one of these meetings and say, I dropped the ball. You know, these people were my people. And I don't mean that in a way that I was doing it for them. I was doing it with them. And it was like a team, if that makes sense. That 90 days really changed who I was and how I move in the world and how I present myself. And that group of people, we still catch up every Sunday. We've still gone through, and that's, you know, nearly 2 years on. We
Wow.
still set each other up for success. The group's gotten bigger as we've moved forward. But we hold each other up. We're each other's friends. We've organised catch up. We're all around Australia and the world, and we catch up, you know, maybe every quarter or so, and we see each other in real life. And it's amazing. And I wouldn't have that without the connection that sobriety has given me.
I love that so much, because those relationships too, especially that we form when we first get sober, you know, those are the ones as we're kind of, you know, moving together in the same direction. I'm almost picturing like a freeway, you know, where all the cars are kind of going the same direction, but some may have been on the freeway for longer than others, or some may be traveling at different speeds than others. But everybody is sort of going, you know, the same way. And I love that, because there's always something that I can get from somebody else's journey that is like an epiphany that I haven't heard before, or haven't heard quite said in that way. And I think that is just the beautiful thing about recovering. And I'm just wondering too, like, if I rewind you to the very beginning, and actually, what is something that you would maybe even tell your clients that you work with when they ask about, gosh, you know, how did you make it through those early days where maybe you were facing triggers? How did you get through those times?
It's a great question. And I don't think it's just specific to early days. Before we pressed record this morning, I mentioned that I just got back from Thailand. I've been overseas for 10 days with my husband, and that's my first sober holiday. So that in itself is fraught with some dangers and some triggers right from the very get-go, because most of our holidays are about rest, relax, unwind. Our normal schedule is thrown out the window because we're sleeping in, we're doing whatever we're doing. For me, the airport is a trigger, because there's no time of day at the airport. You go into the lounge and you sit down and you're handed a glass of wine. There's so many uncontrollables, delayed flights, all those sorts of things. Most resorts, things like that, you know, they have the free flowing drinks packages, all those sorts of things. So even at nearly 2 years, the last 10 days, I found myself not so much triggered, but really mindful and grateful that the tools, which I'll talk about in a moment, that I set up in the early days are what have got me through the last 10 days. And I don't want that to sound like I was sort of sitting in the corner shaking, thinking, oh my God, I can't have a drink. But just the awareness of sometimes taking a breath, or look, if I'm honest with you, there was a couple of mornings where I could see some people that were really hungover and really shady. And I did have a little bit of sober smugness, because I was like, I don't feel like that. You guys feel really bad. And I'm enjoying this sunshine and this, you know, the water and everything that I've got to take in, because I'm not feeling like death warmed up because I've just overdone it the next day. But very early on, and how I walk my clients through sobriety is we try and find a couple of things that are going to fit, that feel like a warm and a safe place. And that's not the same for everybody. For me, the cornerstones of my sobriety I really like writing, and I've always been someone that writes a lot. So for me, journaling was a really important way to sometimes just get those words out of my brain and onto the paper. And once I'd had that mind dump, it's sort of like, it validated the feelings, but it actually removed them from my life. Not my life, but it meant that I could walk through the next moments without thinking about those things. Breaking things down and not, the big picture is really important, but the big picture is made up of teeny tiny, beautiful, horrible, heartbreaking, smile warming, soul, those moments. And so it's those little moments that we have to really early on focus on. So sometimes it is, oh my God, this cup of coffee is amazing. Let's really be aware of what it is that I'm doing and the actions that go into that. Or, I've got 2 teenage boys, so the rarity of getting a cuddle from one of those was like, yes, that's a win. It was really focusing on those little things, because I think in the early days, if we focus on the end point, and by that, if you've got a number in mind, or you are, you want to be sober for 30 days or whatever it is, you miss out on the journey to that end point. And the journey is what keeps you going as we move down the track. The journey is where the learning is. The journey is where the healing is, and where our growth is, and where our development is. And so if we're constantly focused on that end point, and I might add there, if sobriety for life is your goal, there is no end point. You just have to keep going, because that's what life is. And that's, I often say to people, we need to move comparison out of sobriety, because every person you meet is at a different space. They've come from a different place, and someone might have 5 years sobriety ahead of me, and someone might have a year and a half behind me. But that doesn't mean we're not in the same place, or that we haven't had similar experiences, or we can't support each other in the journey. It's a bit like that analogy you talked about earlier in the freeway. We're all going in the same direction. Some of us started our journey a little earlier. Some of us have just jumped on and are really excited, and we're holding the wheel, with great vigor. Some of us are going through the motions. Some of us have reached that point where sobriety is how we live, and we don't think about it. Every day we embrace it, and there's never a day that I'm not grateful that I am now a sober person, but I don't want to say hard, but it's not as much work as it was. And I think that can be applied to anything. If you start a fitness regime, when you start out, it's hard. You get puffed. You don't like it. You feel sore in the morning. And the more you move along, and the more you start to flex your muscles, and you can flex your sober muscles as well, you get a little bit more agile, and you can move around in that space a little more easily. And I think the same is for sobriety. It grows with us if we let it.
I love that. And what are some of these tools you were going to mention? I love solutions, so I'd love to hear.
So as I said, journaling for me is been big. I am a really big believer in meditation, but I'm not very good at it. I try really hard. I have a mind that takes a lot to slow down, but I think there is some real importance in actually slowing our mind down. And sometimes for me, that's not having an empty or clear mind. It's just slowing it down enough to be able to take a few deep breaths. I have in the last 12 or 18 months introduced breathwork into what I do each day. And I think there is a real power in our breath. And I think if we take notice of it, and that doesn't necessarily mean we have to jump out and do a breathwork course, but even in the day-to-day negotiations that we have, we know when we hold our breath. We know when we're feeling a little bit of anxiety or a little bit of discomfort, we sort of go, and you can feel holding it, and it doesn't serve a purpose to our body to be doing that. So breath work for me, or learning to regulate my nervous system with breath, has been really important. A really simple breath work technique is what's called box breathing, which is simply in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. And I use that all the time. And you can do it without looking like you're doing anything. You can just, you can move through life. And if you're having moments where you're feeling a little bit of anxiety, or you're, it's perfect in a job interview or anything like that. It's not just specific to sobriety. I do strongly believe that we hold a lot of our trauma or anguish or anxiety in our body. And that's something I work a lot with my coaching clients, is where do you feel it? And I think if you think about things, like I will quite often feel things in my throat. I have to clear my throat, or you'll feel things that other people will feel things in, maybe get butterflies in their stomach, or our body keeps the score in terms of where it holds things. And I think working through that is something that really serves a great purpose in sobriety. So early on with clients, it's working out where that is. And some people look at me like I'm a bit of a crazy person when I go, where do you feel it in your body? But when you think about it, we do. You just have to start to have that awareness of, where is it sitting? Where can I feel it? And from then you can move through. Sometimes you can really quite easily connect that with something that's happened, or a way a person might navigate their way through life. Sometimes it's just a simple thing that it's what's brought that person comfort through their life, tapping on a shoulder, or holding their heart, or keeping their hand on their stomach. And they've done it because it just feels organically natural. But for me, there is a bigger reason as to why we're holding certain parts of our body. So I think the tools and the work that we do initially for me started all out as awareness. And I did all the things. Like when I entered into sobriety, I was like, man, I am doing it all because this is what's going to fix me. And I think it also, one of the big things I started to realize when I stopped drinking was how much time we got back.
Yeah, totally. Yep, absolutely. In fact, I still to this day, and I got sober in 2011, I will still to this day be like, at nighttime, I can't believe I'm out at night and I'm driving, and I remember everything that's happening, and I'm sober enough to go somewhere and not drink while I'm there and come back, and then not be back home, opening up a fresh bottle of Chardonnay. Like, I mean, it's not lost on me how many hours of my life, like I had about half of a 12-hour day, if that, where I actually was somewhat functional back when I was drinking. And it's sad, but yet at the same time, it all brought me to where I am today. So it's fine, but it is amazing.
Yeah, and I think the time piece allows us to explore different things that we wouldn't have the physical space for as drinkers. And some of those things have worked. Some of those things have been great, and I keep them up. Some of them have just been like, yeah, that's not for me. But the time piece and making the most of that time, like time is one of those things that we always say, oh God, I wish I had more time, or, I just need more hours in the day. And I think having an awareness of that going into sobriety, and being armed with some things to early on fill those hours. Because if you're having a funky day, and you're in a space where, moment by moment is how you need to get through that day, the day can drag on. Like it can be like, oh my God, can I go to bed yet? Can I go to bed yet? But feeling that and acknowledging that. And I think for me, I often would, on those days, and there weren't all that many of them, but, I've been sharing my story since I stopped drinking, and I have to be honest when I do that, in saying that it's not all rainbows and unicorns. There are really tough days. There are days where the easy option would be to go back to where I was. But I've reached a point now where I've got too much to lose to be that person. I've just got too much to lose. But I think in an honest approach to sobriety, we have to be prepared that shit is going to happen, because it does. Whether we like it or not, it just happens. And how we deal with that as we move forward and as we start to get stronger in our sobriety changes our reaction to those sorts of things. And early on, for me, anything bad that happened was fixed with a wine.
Yep.
Anything.
Yep.
Didn't matter how big it was, how small it was, how, whatever it was, I will just have a wine and it'll be fine.
Mhm.
And changing that narrative and changing that process it's not lost on me how big that is. And it's certainly not lost on me when I watch clients realize that they can deal with stuff without having that glass of wine.
Yeah, that is huge when it no longer seems like a solution to life's problems, right? Like, I mean, even listening to you talk, I'm reminded of, and I love that you brought up airports because I have so many like feelings about airports and just memories of constantly being triggered in early sobriety because I used to just drink all the time on airplanes and at the airport. And I mean, that was my thing. You know, I could just sort of check out. All I had to make sure I did was get to the right plane and everything would be okay. And I remember when I got, let's see, when I got to be about 6 months sober or so, I was still doing a little bit of, I'm in a 12-step fellowship. So I was still doing a little bit of work with my first sponsor who I got in treatment. And so I was flying down to Orange County. I was going to meet with her and I was by myself on the plane. And I was just having one of those days where I did not feel comfortable in my own skin. You know, and I was having to feel all my feelings. And I remember thinking, you know, what would take this away is I should just get a couple of Chardonnays, maybe, you know, I don't know, maybe a vodka or something. Nobody would know. Nobody on this plane knows I'm not supposed to be drinking. And so I'm having this thought pattern inside my head when all of a sudden it was interrupted by myself having a conversation with myself going, yeah, nobody on this plane would know that you're not supposed to be drinking, but you would know. And it was like, I cared about that. I suddenly was like, oh my gosh, yeah, why would I do that to myself? And, you know, after having done all of this work and still being very much in this work and, you know, in therapy and working with a sponsor and like going to meetings every day and doing, you know, all of the journaling exercises and all this. And I suddenly cared about losing that. And it was at that moment that I thought, something's working. Something's actually changing inside of me. And it was profound. Like nowadays, you know, I look back on that time and I don't want it to lose its importance to me because it was like, that was a turning point. Did you have anything like that? That was kind of a realization that, yeah, I've got something special here that I've uncovered. And now I don't want to lose this. I want to keep going.
I travel a bit for work, and so I have opportunities where I'm in hotels or apartments, and it is just me. And prior to stopping drinking, man, the negotiations with my internal voice, they were exhausting. Like, I would have these conversations with myself in the shower every morning about today's the day, Shell. Today's the day, right? We're not going to drink. You can do this. And then we call her the wine bitch down here. The wine bitch will come in and go, really? Do you want to not drink today? And look, to any normal person listening to someone talk about two people talking inside your brain while you're doing a shampoo and condition, they would be like, what is wrong? Like, there's something really not right there. But anyone that has this dependency or has had this relationship with alcohol will be nodding their head like you are, because the negotiations were all consuming and exhausting. And you would always end up bowing down to the wine bitch. She always won. She held the bottle of wine and she was pouring it for you, whether you liked it or not. But you did still go through the negotiations. And I think that's something I talk a lot about because it's very real. And I have people speak to me about, should I still have these thoughts about, could I get away with this? And the short answer is yes. Because it's, for a really long time, it was our DNA. It was very deeply encoded into our wiring. This is how we navigate through life. And for really many years, we bowed down to that voice and just said, okay, pour me a drink, pour me a drink, pour me a drink. The more moments we have, like you described on that flight, where we go, no, the less strength that voice has. But I think it's always there in some way, shape, or form, because I think it becomes a quieter voice, but it's always there in some way, shape, or form. The stronger we get, the easier it is for us to go, no, there's nothing that you've got to offer me that would make this experience any better. But I think it's really important to be honest about what happens when we are going through this. And that's one of those things. So yes, when I travel for work, I do have, and I have had moments where I've gone, well, it's just me here. I think I've reached a point though where having it just me is way more important to not do it than to do it. It's like, okay, if I can do this when it's only me sitting in this room watching Netflix, then that is a stronger moment in my sobriety than doing it surrounded by people that are cheerleading me or holding me up. I think there's a real strength in that. Then, you know, because it's you, then it's down to the core of you, and it's you that is saying no. And it's you that is justifying and mitigating that very simple answer of no by all of those reasons that we've built up in sobriety, all those memories, all the importance, all that getting to know yourself and understanding where you've come from. And anyone that's had a relapse, and I've not, but anyone that I've spoken to or worked with that has had a relapse, it doesn't take a great deal of time to get back to your lowest point, you know, so you go back very quickly. And for me, the thought of going back to drinking vodka for breakfast is enough at this point in time for me to go, no, you're more important than that. And that's not diminishing. I mean, relapse is a magnificent part of recovery, because it often brings you to a place of that realization of where you're at and what you need to do to move forward. For me, in those moments, I have enough strength at this point in time. And I think we need to be mindful that sobriety is each moment by moment, and how I feel today might not be the same tomorrow, but I have enough strength in myself and where I want to move forward to cut short those conversations with that horrible wine bitch.
I love that. I've not heard that term before, the wine bitch. That is so great. I love it. And what motivated you to start sharing your story?
Look, I think, and it wasn't so much early on that there wasn't a lot of sharing going on, but I did feel, because my drinking had escalated sort of that last 12 or 18 months of my drinking life to a pretty bad place, I wasn't connecting with anybody in my life, like my family or my friends, and I kept a lot of what I was doing hidden, or I thought hidden, but, you know, let's be honest, if you're having vodka for breakfast, you're not hiding anything from anybody. There was a definite disconnect there for me. So as we moved forward with that, and as I started to want to be different, things started to change, and things started to fall into place for me. I'm sorry, Amy, you're going to have to edit that bit out because I've forgotten the question.
Oh, that's okay. I was just wondering what led you to start sharing your story.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
So sharing my story was really about shining a light for someone that might have been in a similar place to me. Was knowing that if I spoke honestly about who I was and where I'd come from and how my recovery was, that it wasn't the Instagram version of sobriety, that there were days that were pretty rough, and that there are emotions that are going to be really raw. That might actually resonate with someone who goes, okay, that's me. And I've always felt that if one person resonates with one thing that I say, then that's paying it forward and moving to a place of at least maybe providing some awareness
Mm-hmm.
of what it looks like. And a lot of the messages I get on, on Instagram and things like that are about that. Oh, I'm going to start thinking about this. Or I'm going, you're planting a seed. And I think the seed planting is really important, because if I'm honest, that my seed of sobriety was planted probably 5 years before I actually stopped drinking. I started to be aware of, this is probably not great, or this is not the best thing for you, and started baby steps into looking at different programs and what that looked like. And that's the importance of storytelling, because it's not a one size fits all approach. Everybody's drinking story is slightly different, and everybody's recovery story is slightly different. So what worked for you might not work for me, and vice versa. And I think that's the real importance in speaking your truth. And there is something really cathartic about being able to sit with someone like you, or last year I did a live show with 9 other people and we spoke to our stories in front of an audience. There is something really continually healing about telling your story. And every time I tell mine, it's slightly different, and not because it's not what happened, but because as we grow and as we move and as we start to rediscover parts of our body and our mind and our soul, the story and the bits and pieces that have made that up are a little different. How I felt at 6 months is really different to how I feel at nearly 2 years. And you'd attest to that, having many more years under your belt. The feelings and the connections and the rawness and the authenticness that is sobriety changes as we move through. And I think it's really important to be able to have people speaking their story at different times, because there are people joining this amazing group at different times in their life, and they need to have someone that they get.
Yes. So true. So true. And, I'm also, that just must be such an empowering thing to share with clients. And so I'm just kind of wondering, as we start to wrap up, like, what about, because this is what I always encounter, and I don't even know really how to handle it other than to just kind of say, it will reveal itself over time to you whether you should quit or not. So I was going to ask you, how do you handle like the sober curious people?
It's a really good question. And early on, I was a life coach as someone who was a drinker. I probably wasn't a great life coach, but I was, and I still am. And I've just entwined the learnings and the lessons and my experience with sobriety and further education to sort of merge the two. Early on, I chose to deal with anybody and everybody that came to me asking for help, because that was kind of, I felt like I needed to put back and to give back. As I've moved through and I understand where I sit in sobriety and my place with my relationship with alcohol, if someone approaches me and wants me to coach them into how to be a moderate drinker, I can't do that.
Yeah.
Because I can't do that for myself.
Yeah.
It's not in alignment with my beliefs and my core understanding of what addiction is. So I'm very honest and upfront and grateful that you've approached me, but I can't teach you how to moderate drinking because I don't believe in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've learned to handle that with some compassion and some understanding, and can sort of point people in the right direction. Sober curious, I think, is a fantastic space to be, because there's so much information out there in the world for people that really want to arm themselves with an awareness and with information and with, just an understanding of what it means to venture into this world and to not drink. And not everybody that walks through the sober curious doors is someone that has a story like myself or like yourself. It's quite often, it's about other things. It's health, it's wellness, it's wanting to do more and to be better. So the sober curious people that I come across, I love. They're sort of like this, this real effervescence of life. You sort of go, oh, I want to know. And then it's like, okay, let me tell you all about it, Yeah, so the sober curious are great. And I think there's so many platforms out there to provide information and to sort of start dipping your foot into the pool of sobriety and understanding what it means. And I think too, I've certainly had in my life this kind of ripple effect with people who are important to me, who have started to change their relationship with alcohol and started to think about what it means to have a drink. My husband never had a problem like I did, but he's just doesn't drink anymore. Not because he sort of sees the changes in me and, has gone down that path. And it's really lovely when you sort of start to see that influence out there of people making these choices for themselves based on their own set of circumstances. And I think that ties back nicely to that. It's not a one size fits all approach.
Right.
It's not, there's not one way to recover. There's not one way to go into this. There's not one way to, we certainly all went into drinking from very different places. And I think that's something to always bear in mind, that how I approach things might not be for everybody as the same in other people's accounts. But the Sober Curious movement is growing and it's moving forward with great gusto. And I'm really excited to be a little part of that community.
Oh my goodness, Michelle, I have loved this time with you. You're very inspirational. And I just want to thank you for sharing your story. And I'm wondering, can you just, as we're kind of finishing up, share with me where people can find you? Say they want to, follow you or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm predominantly on Instagram and my handle is @thesoberconnection. And I post everything up there. I like to put out there what I'm doing. If people are interested in looking at some coaching options, they can reach out there. Otherwise, my content is it's all an open book. It's very much like this interview. It's, it's unfiltered. It's just me. So, yeah.
So great. Well, on that note, I have to say it's been a pleasure meeting you. And I love that at the very beginning of when we started talking, you mentioned growing up in a drinking culture, which is very true. And it's like, gosh, how incredible that across the world, we can be on different continents, right? And booze is such a culture. Drinking booze is such a culture. And yet, so is recovery, that it can be that connective tissue across all those miles. And so you just really blessed me today. Thanks for coming on. I wish you all the best. And for those of you listening, just remember, be kind, rewind, and thank you for the honor of your time. Take what you like and leave the rest behind.
Thank you so much for listening to Eternally Amy, a mum of eight's journey from jail to joy. Amy Liz Harrison is a best-selling author, speaker, 12-step coach, meditation teacher, and recovery advocate. To find out more, please visit amylizharrison.com. You can keep up with Amy on all platforms by following @AmyLizHarrison. Please subscribe and review this podcast. It means so much to us if you do.